After the Sundering, the Dark Elves ruled the frozen landscapes of Naggaroth and maintained a war with Ulthuan for more than 5,000 years. The Druchii were a dark parody of the Aesir, vicious where their kin were valiant, ruthless without remorse, no matter how depraved their deeds had become. The Dark Elves adored bloodshed, especially when they could extract every last agonizing scream from their enemies. Indeed, death on the field of battle was often the preferred outcome over becoming a Druchii's prisoner of war. Welcome to the 6th in our video series on the races of the Warhammer world, where we will cover the Dark Elven armies. This video is sponsored by Magic Spoon. More on their special offer for you later. Power, achieved through intimidation and strength on the battlefield. Fear instills loyalty. The Dreadlords of Naggaroth. In Druchii society, recruiting capable warriors was not a difficult task. Craftsmanship, general labor, and even farming were trades considered far beneath Dark Elves. These were the duties of slaves. Instead, all citizens were trained from birth to be vicious and deadly killers, with an insatiable hatred for all other creatures, including other Dark Elves. Those who led the Witch King's armies were chosen for their unmatched cruelty and maintained their authority through terror. Dreadlords were the noble-born and exceptionally selfish rulers of cities, commanding the populace frequently against chaos marauders from the north. Black Ark fleet masters were generals who took command of the fleets away from home to pillage seaside villages and cities for wealth and slave labor. But the armies of the Dark Elves were not comprised of elves alone, so the High Beastmasters were made responsible for the training and taming of war beasts. Save for the Witch King and Morathi herself, High Sorceresses were the most powerful weavers of magical spells, and practiced Dar, or black magic. Dar chaotically blended all 8 winds of magic, and was highly unpredictable and taxing, but granted the user a palette of spells far more potent than any other discipline. Civilian volunteers and conscripts provided the greatest number of warriors to fall within the 3 most common infantry units within Dark Elven armies. Dreadspears were considered the most disciplined among their peers, and there was a particularly vicious rivalry between them and their sword-swinging counterparts in the Bleakswords, who were arrogant beyond even the most insufferable noble. To the swordsmen, the Dreadspears were nothing more than peasants, and the crossbowmen of the Darkshards were simple cravens. Though it was true that Darkshards kept away from the front lines, they were no less brutal than the Dreadspears or Bleakswords. Civilian infantry were primarily responsible for holding the line, as their more elite slaughterers ravaged the battlefield in a crazed frenzy. But some Druchii spent their entire lives away from their homelands, sailing the cold seas and sacking coastal cities for slaves and riches. The Black Ark Corsairs were the reavers of the Dark Elf military, and the primary artery of economic flow into Naggaroth. From the riggings, they slashed cutlasses, barbed knives, or fired repeating handbows into contesting warriors. For those they wished to keep alive for a much worse fate, Corsairs ensnared victims with grapples, barbed chains, or nets. In Dark Elven society, the Corsairs were celebrated above all other units. But this celebrity given to the Black Ark Corsairs was unique, and Dark Elf culture was far too venomous and volatile to afford all of their warriors equal glory among the roster. Once dwellers of Clarkarrond, the Shades were the ruling elite before they were ousted from power. They became a feral, strange string of tribes that indulged in cannibalism and had no equal in the art of infiltration and scouting. Many Druchii regiments were not limited only to their roles on the battlefield, and frequently doubled as important figures in religious ceremonies. The blade-wielding executioners of Harganeth were born from such an event. After a great victory over the High Elves was attained, thousands of Aesir were beheaded at the peak of the temple, in such a display that it sent an avalanche of bloody heads tumbling down into the streets. So delighted were the Dark Elves with the mass murder that the executions became a permanent feature of the city, and so too did the executioners. They did not make their killing a sport, but instead took pride in swift, effortless death blows. Gladiator arenas were a natural pastime of Dark Elves, and the undisputed mistresses of the arena were the Sisters of Slaughter. Originally numbering only 12, They pledged their lives to Eldrazi instead of Cain, and grew their numbers into the thousands. The sisters flung themselves into the fray with minimal armor, a buckler shield, and a whip with a cruel flaying bite. Dark Elven raids were often commenced by their arrival, laughing gleefully as they carved a path through the skirmishes by instinct alone. Those who served as the murderous arms of the cult of Cain instead of Eldrazi were the feared Witch Elves, also known as the Brides of Cain. There were none as cruel as these women, and when they weren't ripping out the hearts of sacrifices at the altar, they were where the fighting was most intense. On the eve of battle, the Witch Elves drank blood laced with poisonous herbs to drive them into a divine frenzy, and leaped into the enemy ranks without care for their own safety as a whirlwind of slashing, hacking blades. But you know what, drinking poisonous blood isn't the best way to start your day, so everyone should switch to our sponsor Magic Spoon, bringers of high-protein, low-carb cereal that recaptures the sweet tastes of childhood classics while still being perfect for dieting. Each serving has 14 grams of protein, 5 of carbs but 0 of sugar. It's great for keto and other nutrition schemes, great for celiac or diabetic diets, and it's great because it's got that taste of Saturday morning that'll make carb-conscious lifestyles a joy. And grab their tasty treat snack bars to keep the dream going while on the move. 12 grams of protein, 1 gram of sugar and 2 grams of carbs, right there in your pocket for a simple delicious burst of high-quality refueling. If you think it can't be that good, then Magic Spoon will put their money where your mouth is. Their 100% happiness guarantee means that you can get a refund with no questions asked if you don't like what you bought for any reason. So it's a no-brainer to give Magic Spoon a try, and we'll even make it a touch sweeter with this special offer. If you go to magicspoon.com/wizardswarriors, link in the description, or use the coupon code WIZARDSWARRIORS, all uppercase, you'll get $5 off your order. You can also buy it in grocery stores and on Amazon if you prefer. Wherever you find it, get a protein-packed burst of childhood cereal goodness with Magic Spoon. The highest honor a Dark Elf could hope to receive was to be selected for the Black Guard, the Witch King's personal army. This nomination came at a steep cost, however. Chosen elves were stolen from their mothers immediately after birth, and those same women were executed to destroy any familial ties. The children were raised within the Black Guard barracks instead. As soon as they were able to wield a sword, the young elves were pitted against each other in duels to the death, leaving only the most cruel, merciless and talented fighters to survive and continue their service to Malekith. The Black Guard was an immovable bulwark on the battlefield, and answered to the Witch King alone. The Asur were graced with plentiful pastures, in which to nurture beautiful and swift horses, but in Nagaroth, the land was frozen. Pureblood elven steeds the Druchii stole away from Illyrian became warped and twisted from generations of torturous magical corruption. They became something no longer horse, and were known to outrun all other mortal steeds at a tireless gallop lasting days. Dark elves that mounted these ravenous, flesh-eating beasts were called the Dark Riders, and formed some of the first cavalry units of the Druchii. They were lightning-fast scouts who efficiently gathered intel for the Witch King, and sowed terror before the main armies arrived. The Dark Riders brought simple martial weapons on their rides, but some thundered across the ground with clouds of black magic at their heels. The Doomfire Warlocks were a rare breed of male sorcerers, the sex officially banned from practicing by virtue of Malekith's fear of the Prophecy of Demise, an omen that describes the undoing of a Dark King by the hand of a firstborn son gifted with prowess in dark magic. Believing this prophecy to refer to himself, Malekith cursed the Warlock Riders' souls to Slaanesh. The Doomfire Warlocks delayed this inevitable fate through the constant harvesting of souls, for if they did not satisfy the Dark Prince's desires, their flesh burned away from the creeping runes carved along their bodies until the Chaos God claimed his prize. When the armies of the Witch King marched, so too did the Doomfire Warlocks, in the hope of claiming bright and powerful souls that might keep Slaanesh at bay for a few more days. Twisted elven steeds ridden by the Dark Riders and Doomfire Warlocks weren't the only mount the Dark Elves employed on their conquests. In Hag Graith, Lord Calidor Maglen discovered an expansive cavern beneath the frozen rock with an entire hidden sea. The beasts that lived there were a species of Cold Ones, with a more lithe and dark physique than their Lustrian counterparts, and were ridden by the Cold One Knights. To prevent the Cold Ones from devouring their own riders, the knights would frequently drench themselves in the reptile's foul slime to mask their warm-blooded scent. The repeated applications eliminated the knights' sense of smell, numbed their skin, and destroyed their taste buds. The Cold One Knights rode to war with lances called kaitan, or soul-eaters, and full-plate armor. Druki had both the Cold Ones and the Dark Steeds to pull chariots into the fray. Chariots pulled by a team of Cold Ones shredded through enemy lines with teeth and stabbing spears, while Scourge Runner chariots pulled by the Dark Steeds were assigned to seek out valuable recruits. Barbed nets, harpoons, and chains ensnared any beast the Dark Elves wished to take as their own. Once captured, the beast was dragged for miles to Karand for a life of servitude and suffering, if it survived the journey. The Witch King's army stoked fear and dread in any who witnessed their oncoming march, but not only due to the malevolent elves that made up their ranks. Druki were sadistic beastmasters, capable of training behemoths and feral creatures into acts of terror and bloodshed. Some were created, and others were native to the Land of Chill, such as the feral harpies. They appeared as half-female, half-avian creatures of captivating savage beauty. Rare and nearly exclusive to the cold mountains of Nagaroth, they were believed by the Dark Elves to be the souls of slain witch elves and an omen for good fortune. Many freely lived in Karin Kar and were infamous for hit-and-run tactics. In the Dark Convent in early Druki history, some sorceresses of the Grand Convent sought to elevate their beauty over the gods themselves. The rituals invoked the wrath of Athati, who cursed them to become serpentine beasts with an existence of unending pain and misery. These women became the blood-rack Medusae, languishing for hundreds of years in the spiteful peaks. In war, they were a deadly foe that could kill with a gaze alone. Meeting the eyes of the creature caused the unfortunate victim's blood to boil and violently explode from their body. As the Dark Elves dominated the seas, they discovered behemoths to capture and unleash onto the field of battle. The five-headed stocky Charybdis was a prized monster that Beastmasters would often enlist sorceresses to draw from the depths. They were of limited intelligence, could not be truly trained, and were known to consume their masters and allies in an indiscriminate blitz of tentacles, snapping jaws, and walloping tails. In the Obsidian Peaks, the Dark Elves bred the stubborn and ferocious manticores as mounts. These winged, lion-like monsters were born from the tumultuous winds of magic in the northern Chaos Wastes. The Druki believed manticores to be one of the 1,000 incarnations of Cain, and were held with the highest esteem among their warbeasts. Their territorial nature and immense wrath made them unmatched berserkers in a fight, even to the point of ignoring their riders' commands and throwing themselves into unfavorable fights for the thrill of slaughter. Originally found in the Anuli Mountains of Ulthuan when the winds of magic blew unrestrained, war hydras emerged from the warping effects. After many years of selective breeding and magical influence, the Beastmasters of Karand Kar made them many times more powerful and vicious. The hydras were difficult to control and even harder to kill due to regenerative capabilities that could heal the beast's minor wounds in no time. Whole heads could emerge anew from bloodied stumps, punishing anyone foolish enough to attack it by belching flame from many mouths. Only decapitation of all of its many heads in quick succession could kill the monster. And finally, of the Dark Elves' beasts to join them on the march were the formidable Black Dragons. When the Prince Malekith was scheming to usurp the Phoenix throne, dragon eggs were stolen from the Kingdom of Kelador to create a new breed of dragons. Though there had been some naturally occurring black dragons within the world, the means of their later creation and control was something new and awful for the world to experience. Instead of dragon song, the method in which the Asur wake and communicate with their dragons, the Druki use force, dark magic, pain, and even narcotics to control theirs. The results made for especially malevolent and insidious creatures that enjoyed murder as much as their creators. The Druki were experts at twisting all they touched into barbaric tools of torment. Naturally, these traits translated into their war machines. A deviation from their original design, the Reaper Bolt Thrower was the dark cousin of the Eagle Claw, but modified to be much more cruel. The bolts thrown were barbed and very hard to remove, which guaranteed that anything that was struck by a volley and survived would suffer a slow death of bleeding out anyway. It functions identically to the Eagle Claw, requiring a team of Dark Elves to fire either single shots or repeating bolts. The Reaper Bolt Thrower was a favourite weapon of the Druchii to pepper the decks of enemy vessels. On occasion, the hag sorceress Morathi sent her warriors to retrieve the sorceress-turned-Medusae to serve the Druchii by chaining them to blood-rack shrines. The shrines were propelled by dark magic and featured a large mirror to reflect the deadly gaze of the Medusa and amplify its aura of agony. Priestesses of the cult defended the mirror and Medusa with masks polished to mirror sheen to prevent their own deaths, and the shrine's echo alone was enough to drive mortals mad, except for the Dark Elves, who savour the dreadful song as one might savour a fine wine. And the most infamous of Dark Elven war machines were the Cauldrons of Blood. Morathi claimed that these brass vessels were gifts from Cain himself as a reward for the Witch Elves' dedication to his worship. The basins held gallons of blood and took in many more, but never overflowed. The enchantments upon the cauldrons allowed the artifacts to be used as a reservoir of Cain's blessings, most infamously the power to restore youth and vitality. Very rarely did these machines grace the warfront, and only did so when the promise of plentiful slaughter was certain. When the Dark Elves were near the baleful aura of the cauldron, they were driven into a feverish frenzy, only spent when there was no longer any blood to spill. You know me as your king. Now know me also as the incarnate vessel of your Lord and God, Cain the Ruthless, the bloody-handed messenger, Jaguar of the Night, the Manticore. In me, he has invested his power in the mortal realm, so that he might lead you on the crusade of death. Malekith, Witch King of Naggaroth. The Witch King himself, Malekith, did not neglect to indulge himself in the carnage of war when his Druchii marched. He was both a powerful spellcaster and a fearless swordsman, wielding a blade of his own making, the Destroyer. Malekith was protected from any strike by a full suit of rune armor he had been encased in since the flames of the Shrine of Asuryan rejected him. Armed with a spell shield to absorb or reflect magical attacks, the Witch King often flew as an ominous shadow atop the black dragon Seraphon and crashed down onto the enemy in a murderous rampage. The throne is there for the taking. Only by your own hand can you take it and deserve to sit upon it. Bel-Shannar was given rule by others. True kings seize it for themselves. Morathi sparing her son to regicide. Once the Queen of Ulthuan, Morathi was both the mother of the Witch King and the hag sorceress above all other sorceresses. She was one of the most powerful wizards in the mortal world and a storm of destruction in battle. Often she did so upon the back of Sulafet, a dark Pegasus. Jabbing the lance staff Heartrender through the chests of her enemies, she ripped out hearts effortlessly. If Morathi took damage, the amber amulet she carried would regenerate her health. Her dark sword was enchanted with spells of blinding and enfeeblement, so that anyone who clashed swords with the hag sorceress would be horribly weakened. We raid other lands for the gold and flesh to sustain our kingdom. The weak suffer so the strong may survive. That is the way of the world, and we are its finest predators. Malice Darkblade. Also known as the Tyrant of Hag Graith, Malice was a favoured servant of the Witch King, possessed by a demon of Slaanesh after he delved too deeply into the Chaos Wastes in search of power. When Darkblade slumbered, Zarkhan would take control. Thus, the Dark Elf drank potions to keep himself awake, until it was required to call upon the demon's strength and savagery by drinking a potion of sleep. He rode to war upon an unusually intelligent Cold One named Spite, and brandished the warp sword of Cain that gave him the strength of the elven god. Kayla Mensha Cain, for hate's sake, hear our petition. As blood answers the throat slit, keep the hearts of the Druchii cold and bitter. Bless the Druchii, ever your acolytes and assassins, with murder in your name and victories as certain as spite. Hellebron, Hag Queen. Known as the Crone, Hellebron spends the majority of the year as an elderly and withered dark elf. Though she is blessed with renewable youth from the Cauldron of Blood, Morathi intentionally kept the deepest of secrets from Hellebron and denied her the eternal youth and beauty that the hag sorceress enjoys. Only during the sacrifices on Death Night was Hellebron able to return to her youthful form. But with each passing year, the duration of the effect dwindles. In battle, she slashes at her foes with two blades, the Death Sword, enchanted with dark magic, and the Cursed Blade, with the ability to parry and deflect physical attacks. Hellebron was resistant to magic thanks to the Amulet of Dark Fire that veiled the crone with a mystical flame shield. The strong take what they want, while the weak choke on their own blood. Lokhir Felhart. When the Black Ark sailed, no other admiral was more feared than Krakenlord Lokhir Felhart. A descendant of Menraith Felhart, the first commander of the Tower of Blessed Dread, he was respected by his corsairs as a rare admiral unhesitant to fight at the forefront of any battle. His first deed after the assassination of his father was the raising of multiple High Elven ports and the sinking of dozens of dragon ships in a single night, which poured slaves and riches into Karent Ka. The recognizable Helm of the Kraken was always covering his face, and rumored to be an ancient artifact older than all elven civilizations. His two swords, the Red Blades, were forged from a statue of Inden Bloodsteel, stolen from the Temple of Gilgadresh. "Heed my words, human," the Dark Elf Lord spoke, his voice like burning coals stirred in a grate. "For you are not worthy to hear them twice. I am Rakarth," the Dark Elf announced, his hateful voice boastful and haughty, "called Beast Lord." Rakarth addresses Duke Corentin of Briand, 1974 IC. Of the Beast Lords of Naggaroth, the most accomplished was Rakarth of Karent Ka. At the young age of 8, he tamed a dark steed with a mere look of intense will and subjugation. He had been blessed with an uncanny ability to bend any beast's will to his service, and was one of the few known to have ridden and tamed a black dragon. He was armed with the Whip of Agony and the beast armor of Karent Ka. There was an exhaustive list of reasons why an army in the Warhammer world might think twice before challenging the Dark Elves on land or sea. And yet there were even more terrible factions to rival their depravity and forces of order brave enough to draw blades against them, despite the daunting risks. More videos on the races of the Warhammer fantasy world are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.